started. I like to be on time if we can possibly do so. Good evening, everybody. It's 6:03, and this is our March 31st, 2021 Town Council workshop for the Downtown Windermere Properties PUD rezoning and preliminary site plan. We're really just looking tonight to learn a lot, ask some questions, hear from the applicants, hear from the residents, and spend a lot of time on Q&A. Robert, I believe at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it to Brad. Is that what you're thinking, or did you want to kick us off?
I'll just go through some housekeeping issues. The format that we're going to be utilizing tonight is just going to be, we'll have the town planner go ahead and present the application that was submitted to us. And then we'll have the applicant present their presentation. Then after that, we'll open it up for town council Q&A. And then after that, we'll open it up for the residents Q&A. We would ask that everybody keep their computers muted until after the presentations. And then if you have a question, you can go ahead and open up the chat box and ask the question in the chat box. And we'll do the chat box questions first. And then if you don't have a chat box option, there's a raise hand icon that you can utilize, and then we'll call on you through the raise hand icon, and then go from there. I do want to say that we're making sure that we are still under the decorum policy of the Town of Windermere, which means that you direct all of your questions to the town council or to staff or to the applicants. Do not start asking questions, pointing fingers, boos, claps, anything like that to any residents, anybody else. Again, this is just a information only presentation for you to ask some questions and get some facts of what's actually being presented for the 500 block. And with that said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brad Cornelius.
All right, thank you, Robert. Just for a quick introduction, again, as Robert said, my name is Brad Cornelius, and I'm the town planner with the firm, and I'm with the firm of Wade Trim. And so I'm happy to present it. What I'm going to present to you all this evening is, and this has been posted on the town's website, is basically a frequently asked questions about this project and this process. So my presentation is going to be very much about, what is being proposed and what are the standards that they're subject to, information about the zoning and the land use, and a lot of the questions that we've already heard, about this proposed project. So with that, Robert, you can move on, please.
Yeah, and real quick before we even get started too is, the process is once the town receives an application, we have to process that application. Just because of applications being processed doesn't necessarily mean the town is for or against it. A lot of people believe that just because something is being proposed or taken through the process that it's automatically going to be approved as is. And that's not the case here. There's a lot of negotiation, a lot of discussion on what can and cannot be approved and what rules and regulations that the applicant has to follow. So I just want to clarify that because again, a lot of times people believe once a developer submits something that it's just going to be run through the process. So I'll go ahead and move it over. I'm going to be Brad's Vanna White tonight, so please bear with me.
Thank you, sir.
And hey, Brad and Robert, let me interject
Yes,
one quick thing because we have two new council members on here. We have Mandy David and Tony Davider. There's no decisions that will be made tonight through the council process, right? This is Q&A. This is information for council as well as residents to get a feel for the process, to get a feel for the proposal, and to get all of their questions answered as much as possible. Okay, thank you. Brad?
Thank you, Mayor. So yeah, to start out, just as a quick reminder, where is this project located? I'm sure we all know, but it's at the northeast corner of Main Street and 6th Avenue. The property is a little bit over 2 acres. And what will happen as part of this project, the existing buildings that are on the property currently, which we have the real estate building there at the corner, we have the ice cream shop, and we have Elysium and the insurance agent building there. So those 3 buildings on Main Street would be coming down. And then there's 2 single family homes that are on the backside along Oakdale. Those 2 homes would be removed as well as part of this proposed project. So just so everybody is aware of that. Next, please. So I know a lot of people wonder, what is this? Well, so what this project is the proposal is to redevelop the 2 acres with up to a maximum of 21,750 square feet of retail, restaurant, and office space. What you see there on the left side of the screen is the preliminary site plan that has been submitted. In terms of, and I'll go more into detail as I go through my presentation here, but just some general facts about the project in terms of what it is. The project will be 2 buildings that will front on Main Street. That you can see there at the bottom of the plan. Those will be the only 2 structures that'll be constructed as part of this project. Together, they won't exceed 21,750 square feet. The building that fronts on the corner of Main and 6th, portion of that building is proposed to be 2-story, where that X is. However, the buildings will not exceed 35 feet in height. That is the maximum height that's allowed in the town. And what is being proposed will not exceed 35 feet in height in terms of the buildings. You can see on the site plan here, the preliminary site plan, they have internal off-street parking and stormwater. And what's important about this, and again, I'll go into this more in a little bit detail here in a moment, you can see how that is to the back of the property or on the property that is along Oakdale. The reason for that is what's required by the town master plan. Is that the buildings are required to be pushed to the front, to Main Street, and the properties on the back or along Oakdale are required to be parking and stormwater and buffering. So that's why that is arranged in that manner, with the parking in the back and the buildings to the front is for that. And again, I'll talk about more. And then also what's very important to point out right now, early on, is there's also the required project boundary buffering. So the code in the downtown master plan along Oakdale Street in particular, it does require a 20-foot buffer on the property, not within the right of way, but on the property, a 20-foot landscape buffer with a 6-foot wall that's within that buffer. The landscaping would be on the outside of the wall on the side towards the homes on Oakdale. So that is a requirement for that buffer, and that is what's required by the master plan. There will also be a buffer along the eastern portion of the frontage on 6th Avenue where the parking is, which is also a requirement along with the wall. And then you also see on the top left corner of the property is at this stage of the review or of the planning is a proposed stormwater pond. Again, but that's subject to further design and location. So that's the general orientation of the proposed project. The other 2 points just to point out while we're here in terms of access, there's only 2 access points to the property. The one there that Robert's pointing to, there's the one access off of East 6th Avenue. A requirement of the master plan is that access can only be a right in, right out only, which is what's being proposed by the applicant. You also see there a little bump out, little indentation as part of the traffic study. The town's traffic consultants, engineering consultants, Kimley Horn, made the recommendation that they install a right-hand turn lane to take traffic out of the queue to get into the property. So they are also showing the installation of a right-hand turn lane into the project. On the other side of the property, over on the 5th Avenue side, there'll be a full access connection to West 5th Avenue. So that'll be full access to that point. There is no access to Oakdale. That boundary is completely closed off. It will be all buffering and stormwater. So there's no access to Oakdale, as well as there's no roadway access off of Main Street. So it's just off of those 2 side streets. And that's a requirement there. Next, please. One of the probably the biggest questions that I've been getting, and when we had our development review board meeting is, what is the property's future land use and zoning? So this is very important. So the 2 acres, it has a future land use, which is adopted as part of your comprehensive plan, as part of your future land use map. And that's what you see here on the slide is your future land use map. It has on the property, on the front piece on Main Street, it has the commercial. On the back half of the lot, it has the residential. However, it also has the town center overlay district, which is also applied to those properties. And so what that does is it provides that these properties are able and actually more than able, they have to develop consistent with the downtown master plan. They cannot be developed in any other manner. They have to be developed consistent with your downtown master plan. And that is adopted in your land development code that way, and it is also within your comprehensive plan that way. So they have a commercial and residential land use and zoning, but they also have the overlay district, which allows for this application to come forward and for this potential development. Next, please. Next, Robert. Thank you. So I already said this, but I'll go over it one more time because this is very important. So the entire property is within this town center master plan overlay district. And so, and as I had said earlier, the master plan requires that this property be developed, and I'll say redeveloped or developed, where the commercial piece, the buildings are fronting Main Street. That's how they have to be. And then with the parking in the back, that's how it has to be under the master plan. Next, please. And here's the master plan. This is the master plan over. The master plan is much more than just this one page, but this is the actual map of the master plan. So this was adopted back in 2004. And many of you know the reasons for it back when this was adopted, and it went through a very intensive process with the town back then to create this master plan. Robert's showing the location of where this project is being proposed there at the corner of 6th and Main Street at the northeast corner. So this is the master plan that was adopted by the town in 2004. It has been adopted in your land development code as well as your comprehensive plan since that time. So this has been in place for many years. And what this shows is the orange area. That area shows that that's the area where the buildings are restricted to. They can only be on those lots that front Main Street. And then the area to the back is white, and you can see it labeled as parking zone. That's where the parking is required to be placed to be consistent with this master plan on the back of these lots along Oakdale. And then you can see the green strip going around the back there along Oakdale and part of 6. That's the 20-foot buffer that I spoke about. The master plan then also requires a 20-foot landscape buffer with the wall along Oakdale Street. So this plan or this concept for these properties to be potentially redeveloped in this manner was actually envisioned back in 2004 and has been codified or in the town's code since that time. This is just our first project in the town that's coming through under these standards and under that plan. This is we haven't had anything in the town that has actually developed under this plan. This is the very first project that would be actually developed under this plan. Next, please. And again, this reiterates what I had said again. It does show the access limited to 6th Avenue is right in, right out. It shows the full access there on 5th. So it just reiterates those are the requirements that this proposed development has to meet in terms of the location of the buildings, the parking, and the access. This is what they're required to meet. Next, please. And then in terms of, again, the landscape buffer, it does require the 20-foot there along Oakdale and along the portion of 6th, as well as a part of the portion of 5th. It is a 20-foot with a wall and landscaping. And the other important part of this, the town center guidelines and overlay district is it does also have architectural requirements and standards for the buildings. The master plan has requirements for the character of the buildings to be sure that the buildings maintain and enhance the existing character of the town. So those are part of the master plan. Those are part of the requirements for as if this project moves forward, their buildings that they would be building would have to be consistent with those architectural standards and requirements of the master plan. Next, please. So again, just to be clear about how this is adopted and implemented, the master plan and the overlay district, because I know this is kind of confusing. So there's actually 3 levels of adoption or implementation of this master plan that guides this potential development. It's first, the town did adopt the town center design guidelines, which are required to be met. They, in section 305.00 of your land development code is where those guidelines are implemented and required to be adhered to. And in your comprehensive plan in policy 1.4.21 of your future land use element and your future land use map, that is also where it requires any development on this property to follow that master plan for its implementation. So there's 3 levels of implementation here. So what are the approvals that are required for this proposed project? What do they have to do? What do they have to be? So it's basically a 3-step process. I did, just so everybody's right, I did leave out the initial phase, which is basically just a pre-application meeting with the town manager and myself, just to talk about the proposed project. So that really kind of kicks it all off. But so the 3 approvals they have is the rezoning of the property to planned unit development. That's the first step. And that's what you have coming before you at your public hearings in April and June, is to rezone it to the PUD. We get a lot of questions about, well, why does it have to be rezoned then? You know, if the comp plan already says, the land use already, the zoning already says it's allowed, why does it need to be rezoned? Well, the reason is your comprehensive plan also says that any development within the downtown overlay district has to go through the PUD zoning process and get the PUD zoning assigned to the property. Because when it appears when that was adopted back in 2004, that was the mechanism and the tool the town wanted to use to implement that master plan, was through the PUD zoning process. So that's why it has to go through the rezoning. The comprehensive plan requires it to go that way. I will also say, and I know this was a question I had earlier as well, is it would not allow for somebody, particularly for those properties on Oakdale, to come in to just straight rezone those to straight commercial. They can't do that. The town's comprehensive plan does not allow that to happen. They are only allowed to develop those consistent with the master plan through the PUD process. And the important part of the PUD process is that what we're doing right now is that PUD process is very involved. It's a difficult process. But part of it, that's the good part, is it has a lot of opportunity for input and discussion by the public, by the Development Review Board, and by town council. So it gives a lot of opportunity for the town council to review it, provide comments, concerns, suggestions, and ideas as it goes through the process. So the PUD is designed to be this way, to have this kind of dialogue as we go through. Next, please.
You got messages.
So the next part is, what is the PUD process? So the PUD process, again, it's a 3-step process. The first process is what's called the conceptual plan review. What occurs with the conceptual?
Yeah.
Sorry, Brad, I had to cut you off. Just so everybody's clear, we need to make sure that everybody is muted except the person that's speaking, or else we'll get feedback. So, Brad, if you can go ahead and unmute.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So what this is a 3-step process. So the first step of this process was a conceptual plan review. And what that process is the members of the Development Review Committee or Board, Development Review Board, have an opportunity on an individual basis to review and provide comments on a conceptual plan for the PUD. This occurred for this project back in October of 2020. The individual DRB members were provided the conceptual plan. They then provided comments back on the conceptual plan, which were then provided to the applicant to get the general, what the general feeling of individual members are. That was the first step of the process. It was all done individually. It was all an individual process. So that's the first step. Where we are now is in the second step. This is where we are now. And this is where it's called the preliminary site plan approval for the PUD. So under the preliminary site plan, this is where the town council where you make the decision whether or not to actually rezone the property, to give it the PUD zoning designation. It does not give any approval for any development activity. It is a preliminary plan that still has to be fleshed out and fully designed and engineered before it would get its approval to move forward. This simply, or what this does, this preliminary plan process puts the zoning in place if it's approved, and it also provides the maximum potential development that could happen on the property based on that preliminary site plan that has been submitted. It doesn't say that that's what they get to do. Doesn't say that, you know, they're guaranteed, in this case, 21,750 square feet. What it says is you can't go above that number. You can always be less than it, but you cannot go above that number. So it sets the maximums that are there. So where this is in the process, the preliminary plan and the PUD rezoning is required to be reviewed by the Development Review Board as a board. That did occur. They held their public hearing on February 16th. And that should say 2021, I apologize. That should be February 16th, 2021. They held their public hearing on that date, and they reviewed the project, took public comment, and they did make a recommendation at that meeting, that hearing, for approval of the PUD zoning and of the preliminary site plan. I will let the council know, because it will be part of my staff report to you all. You know, there was a lot of discussion about the issues of this project, about the design and some concerns. But the Development Review Board as a whole, with their vote, said, you know, it'll come back to them again as the final development, as part of the final development plan. So they have reviewed it. They have made a recommendation. This is scheduled now to come to the town council, and you all are required to do 2 hearings on this. And it'll be an ordinance for your consideration. The first hearing will be on April 13th of 2021. And the second hearing will be on June 8th of 2021. The reason for that gap between the 2 hearings is your code requires for PUD zoning hearings, there has to be 30 days between your town council meetings, and there's not 30 days between your April meeting and your May meeting. So that's what pushed it to June. So this will be coming to you all in April, and then again for your consideration in June for your final decision on the PUD and the preliminary site plan. But again, that does not authorize them to build anything. It provides the zoning and provides the maximum potential that could be there. Now, if this were to be approved, and again, I'm just saying if, I don't know it will or not. If this is approved, what then would happen next is then they would have to come back to the town with a final development plan, which is fully engineered, fully designed. That final engineering plan would go back through another public hearing process. It would go back to the Development Review Board for their review and recommendation. And it would be a public hearing again for public comment and feedback. It would then come back to you all again for your final review and final consideration of approval. So there is another process, if there were to be approved, another set of public hearings and another final set of plans that'll be publicly reviewed prior to them being able to get approval to move forward with development. So there is another process that would go after this. Robert, next, please. So the purpose of the PUD, again, it's to assure that the project that's being proposed is consistent with all the requirements of the town center design guidelines. That's the purpose of the PUD. And also to assure that we maintain compatibility with adjacent properties by implementing the buffering and the requirements of the master plan. Next, please, Robert. So in terms of the preliminary site plan, what's the purpose of that? So as I said, the preliminary site plan that you're considering now That is setting the maximum potentials that are there, that could be there. Now, specifically as a good example in this particular case, that when they get into their final engineering, it could very much change in terms of how much, in terms of reducing the footprint of the potential development as they go through their stormwater analysis, as they go through their septic analysis. That could have that could have that impact. So we don't have all those answers at a preliminary plan perspective, because right now we're setting maximums. But it'll come back, and that'll be part of the final development plan process. Next, please. One of the questions we've heard too, are they asking for any waivers or variants as part of this PUD request? The code does allow a developer, as part of the PUD, to ask for waivers or variances as part of the PUD process. So they are allowed to ask for it. Doesn't mean they have to be granted it, doesn't mean you have to approve it, but they are allowed to ask for it. In this case, they've only asked for 2 waivers to the submission requirements, but not to any of the design standards. And the 2 requests for waivers that they asked for, the first one was the PUD submission requirements requires you to provide 1-foot topography maps of the property. They did not provide that. It wasn't really seen needed for this level of analysis at this point. When they get into their stormwater design, they will need that more specific information. But at this point, they did not provide that. The second request for a waiver of their submissions is that they've also requested a waiver to providing the actual building facade drawings at this point of the process. So the PUD preliminary plan submission requirements does call for the submission of building facade drawings for it. They have asked for a waiver to do that. However, what they have committed within their application, within their plans, and what they've said during the hearings, and again, they can address this specifically, they have committed to meeting all the building facade requirements of the town center design guidelines. And also to be consistent with the other new construction happening, the new town administration complex, the new Windermere Brewery, to be consistent. But the town and the town council will get those when it comes back to you for final development plan approval. So they're not getting away from providing it. They will. They're just asking not to have to provide it now. And again, they're not asking though for any deviations or waivers from the requirements or from the standards of design for the project. Next, please. Trees. Lots of questions about the trees on the property. So with the application initially that was submitted, they did submit an old tree survey that really didn't match up to the project. But the developer has committed as part of his hearing at the Development Review Board and as part of his application, they are putting together an updated tree survey to reflect the current conditions on the property. So that will be part of the final development plan. Now, the important point is, I think, about the trees too, is this developer and this proposed development, like any other development in the town of Windermere, they are subject to the same tree protection requirements that the town has. So there's mitigation requirements, there's protection requirements. They are subject to those same requirements as any other development would have in the town of Windermere. So there's not an exception. And actually, one of the things I know that they're looking at as they continue with their design, there is an ability under the master plan to provide for reduced parking standards in exchange for protecting trees. So there are opportunities to do that. Again, they will get into that as they come forward with a final development plan. Next, please, Robert. The other big question that was asked was, what about traffic? And we all acknowledge and understand there's a big issue with cut-through traffic, particularly at the peak hours in the town of Windermere. So one of the requirements of the PUD was the applicant was required to provide a professionally done traffic study of the proposed impacts to the roadways. And what the traffic study was presented. The town had Kimley Horn, who's the town's engineers, review the traffic study and provide a recommendation on the traffic study. In terms of volumes, when we look at the volumes that were presented in the master plan, and I have that written down and I have to find it. Hold on 1 second. Yeah, the traffic study submitted talked about daily trips, which was fixed 560. Those are potential trips over an entire 24-hour period. That's not at like a single shot, single time. When you look at the peak hour trips for the property and for the proposed project, it is, and I apologize because I can't find my number, but it is roughly about it was roughly about 48 p.m. peak hour trips was the number of trips in the peak hour. And that peak hour is basically between 4 and 6 p.m. So based on the traffic study, which Kimley Horn did review and accept, it's projected at 48. Now, these are projections. These are based on standard trip generation rates, which is the professional standard for analysis. Now, if you look at what's already out there, one of the things to look at is what's that net change between what's already there and what's being proposed. So when you apply the same factors of trip generation to what's already out there, you end up with about a 20, right around a 25 to 28 trip increase over what's projected to be out there now. So in that peak hour time, over what would be projected from what's there today, you're looking about less than 30 additional trips within that peak hour. But that drove the recommendation from Kimley Horn to put in that right turn lane into the property, to pull that traffic out of that queue so it can flow in without backing up that queue anymore as it comes into that property. That was part of that. And as the council is aware too, the town is looking at improving the roundabout there at 6th and Main Street, which could also help traffic flow generally throughout that area. So that is the traffic discussion. Robert, next please. And one more just on traffic, and I said this earlier, again, there's only going to be the right in, right out on 6th Avenue, the full access on 5th, and then no access on Oakdale or on Main Street. So the access points are limited on the sides. Next, please. Water and sewer. So in terms of potable water, the property will be served and can be served by Orange County Utilities. So there will be central water that's already available to the site. That'll be their potable water. And for the wastewater, it will be an on-site septic system. So as I said earlier, currently they have not designed the proposed septic system. So they don't have a calculation yet on how big that system will need to be. That will occur during the final development plan process. They'll have to have those calculations, that information to do the final development plan. What I would anticipate the potential impact on this property when they do that, when they have to site their drain field, that potentially would then reduce the area available for parking, which then in turn would reduce the available amount of square footage for the buildings. So again, I won't know until we actually see a final development plan, but I do believe that once we get to that point, the number will be less than 21,750 when they start taking into account the septic needs. Next, Robert, please. And I know everybody's very concerned. How will the homes on the east side of Oakdale be protected? So again, the master plan was designed with that in mind. That is why it does require the 20-foot landscape buffer with a solid 6-foot wall along the Oakdale Street boundary of the project. The buffer has to be, or the landscape has to be on the outside of the wall facing the homes on the other side. It has to be on the property. They cannot use the right-of-way because there is quite a bit of right-of-way between the travel way and the property line. It has to be on the property. But we don't have the details yet on what that landscape plan would be. So that would be provided as part of the final development plan, where the town council would get the opportunity to consider it and approve it or ask for more or different kind of landscaping. And through the PUD process, you do have the authority to ask for additional buffering if you find it necessary for the project. Next, please. There are many other permitting agencies beyond the town of Windermere for this project before they would ever get to do any kind of development. So the three main ones are going to be the Orange County Health Department for their septic system. They'll have to go a separate permitting process with Orange County Health Department. They'll have to go through a permitting process with Orange County Utilities to make their connection to the county water. And most importantly, I would say, is they also are going to have to go through the South Florida Water Management District for a permit for their construction. It'll require what's called an environmental resource permit. Basically, it's the permit on how they're going to maintain and manage their stormwater. And basically what that permit says is the existing discharge from the site, stormwater flow from the site cannot change after development. Pre and post has to be maintained the same. So those are many other of the agencies they will have to go through permitting beyond the town. Next, please. And last slide is, I am happy to talk with anybody at any time about the process and the information. As Robert said, my role as a town planner is not to provide a recommendation, not necessarily to say something is good or bad. It is to say, this is what the standards are, this is what the process is, are they compliant or not compliant? And those are the kind of, that's what my role is to provide to you all. But please, my contact information is there on the slide. You can contact me at any time. And you contact town staff and they'll get you in touch with me as well. And as a final reminder, the town council is on April 13th at 6 p.m. for the first public hearing. And the second is on June 8th at 6 p.m. So with that, that finishes my presentation.
Okay, Mayor, if you want me to hold questions of Brad, I can go ahead and open it to the applicant because they may be able to answer some preemptive questions from town council and then open it up to town council. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, that seems reasonable, Robert. Let's do that.
Okay, Mr. Hall, if you can go ahead and unmute and I'll be your Vanna White.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Hello, my name's Jim Hall, and I am the applicant for the project. If we could go to the second slide, please. So the property is owned by Jim Carr and he is landowner partners and owned the land for a considerable length of time. I'm the principal at my own firm, and I have been working here in Orange County, projects in Windermere for the last 33 years. The transportation study was done by Tony Luke, who's been here 34 local projects, that was signed off by Kimley Horn, the town's transportation engineering consultant. And we also brought in Joe Samnick, who is, in my opinion, the foremost arborist in all of Florida, and he has 55 years experience. So we have tried to assemble a team that really understands how to not only go through a process, but create a development that will really be the win-win-win for the developer, for the town, and for all the people that will enjoy using this into the future. Next, please. So Brad did a very good job and went over all the standards quite well. So there's the 2.17 acre site. So there's like, a little under 7,000, no, maybe a little over 7,000 square feet of building are there now. So our request, technically in a zoning sense, is for like 14,000 square feet, not for the whole 21, because you take away what's there, it's already counted, and is included in all the traffic and all the other calculations that were done. So the new would be one third of what we're asking for is already there on the ground. Next. So from the get-go, Jim Carr has been adamant that to create a really high quality project for everyone, we're going to have not just one type of use. There'll be a mixture of non-residential uses. We're not asking for any residential uses at all. There'll be straight retail uses, food and beverage, some type of, restaurant type setting, and there'll be some office space, all included. We think it's really important to hit long time history of the project is it needs to age really, really well over time. And for those of you who have been in Windermere over the decades, it has to be flexible that a use that was this for these 7 or 8, 10 years, for the next 10 years can be a different use. So there has to be some flexibility. And that comes out of both the site plan and the architecture, and to another great extent, following the town center design guidelines. And the basis of the town center design guidelines and the basis for what I've been directed to do and what I wholeheartedly believe in is we need to create a really great place for pedestrians and the residents of Windermere, that experience you feel along Main Street, it doesn't even say the same. It actually gets better. And there's our current request for the square footages of the retail, the food and beverage, and the office. Next. So Brad went over this, but I think this is really, really critical for y'all to understand that the zoning, if you look at the bottom, the red underline under that white insert box, number 2, does not authorize this development activity at all. This just grants us the standards that we have to follow when we get to the next step, which is the final development plan. So until you really know, now we're set up to 21,750 square feet, but it's up to. It doesn't say we absolutely get it. It could be less. And it starts to set out all those standards that we have to follow, the building height, the building placement. You'll see in the next few slides that we have followed the town center design guidelines explicitly. So we're really just setting the standards with this. And when you get to see the next set of drawings that'll come out and go through this exact same process through DRB and then 2 hearings with the town council, that's where you'll see the absolute explicit detail of how this is really going to work. We're pretty confident of how we've laid it out now because we've been working on this quite a while. And if we can go to the next slide. This is the overview of what the town center design guidelines say we must do. So we have to promote compatible, pedestrian-friendly architecture. And the town center design guidelines has standards for architecture, and we are going to follow those. We have to create a sense of place. I think that when we look at the site plan a little closer, you'll see that. We're not going to have prohibit storefronts that resemble a big shopping center. No, that's not our gig. Monolithic building facades. No, we want to be something that's on scale with the sidewalk and the pedestrian realm that's right there on Main Street. The signage is something that will really get worked out at final development plan, and attractive shaping that complements the green ambiance. We're all about that. And again, the finite details of that will be a development plan. Next, please. So Brad, we're right in that red circle that's on the left. And if you look on the right, that is our block with the orange, the buildings fronting Main Street, the parking behind, and a buffer. Next, please. So this is how it works out. On the left is our zoning plan that shows the orange is where the buildings go, that hatch is where the parking goes, and the green are the buffers. And it shows the 2 access points. And if you look at the plan on the right, that's the plan we have to follow. And so the orange is on the front, the parking is in behind, the access points are in the same place, and the green is where the green is. So we have tried to exactly conform to the town center design guidelines in every fashion. Next, please. So here's the site plan. It's showing the kind of the same thing in more detail. The red box is the orange, and that's where our buildings are. They all stay inside that zone. And then the parking is to the east. And then there's the buffer area along the side. What we have done and tried to is, particularly on Main Street, there's 3 large oak trees that are there by the Carr Realty building. And so we've actually moved the building around, and the little squares indicate that those could be, those will be pavers instead of just pouring concrete, so that according to, Joe Samnick and what we generally know, what the tree needs around its roots is water and air movement. So pouring it with concrete would not provide that. It would be a worse solution. So doing something that then would allow air and water to get to the tree roots, so we can save those 3 trees in particular are critical, and that's what we're trying to do. Then if you can see the pass through between the 2 buildings, there's a tree in there. And again, we're trying to create a situation where that tree can be saved, and that will be pavers that will allow the air and the water to penetrate. And then you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's 12 trees around the perimeter that will all be saved. So there will be a lot of trees, and just thankfully, a lot of the large mature heritage oaks are on the Main Street Oakdale side, so that interface between the parking lot and the neighbors to the east on Oakdale, those trees will be maintained and preserved, so that not only is that the 20-foot buffer with the 6-foot wall, but there's trees that are decades and decades old that will stay. So what the town center design guidelines tell us is we have to have a 20-foot buffer with a 6-foot wall. We've done that. We've put the parking where it's supposed to be. We have the access where it's supposed to be. We have a loading zone how it's supposed to be. And so we have, again, tried to exactly conform to the town center design guidelines. Next. Here are the standards for the parking lot and how you handle the buffer. At the bottom left is, the buffer with a wall near the back of it, and then parking's hidden in behind it. And then there's the standards for the size of parking spaces and the size of the buffer and how big the islands for the trees have to be. And we followed that exactly. Next. Then we come to the placement of buildings is what this is all about. And what we've done is we've placed the buildings on Main Street as required. And then we followed the diagram on the left that showed like you'd have that mid-block opening to connect the parking lot between buildings and out to Main Street. And that connection we've done is wide enough that, like, on weekends or special events, activity could actually spill out into that space to kind of make it not just a sidewalk to get from here to there, but it actually starts to become an activity space. And it's anchored by that large oak tree. So it has this large canopy that'll provide shade, and you have a ton of different things that could all go on in that mid-block crossing. And then we have that the sidewalks that you all have out there on Main Street now will stay, but it'll be augmented by saving the 3 trees and creating some more hardscape with the pavers around the trees, so that the buildings start to interface with the street and the pedestrian realm of the sidewalk really well. But what you have out there today will also stay with the on-street parking and the planter beds with the trees, and particularly the 3 large ones at the Carr Realty building. That'll all be there and remain. And then there's some detail about where the buildings sit and all the percentages and things of where they have to be. That all remains the same, and we've followed that completely. Next, please. Okay, architecture. I thought Brad quite well that our request is up to 21,750 square. We don't know if we're going to reach that. We will reach that with the plan we've drawn with our parking. But when we get to the level of the septic for the retail and the septic for the office is less than what it is for houses. Houses generate more septic use than an office or a retail building does, because there's no cooking, there's no showering, there's no washing of clothes, so it's less. Where for our septic use, where the rubber really meets the road is if we have food and beverage. That's where that amount of septic really will get larger. So that's why we ask for the deferral on providing you the architectural facade standards now, because every time the square footage of the building changes, then the architecture changes. And the architectural facades and treatments and how you figure that out is a very expensive position. So what we've said is we're going to follow these standards exactly as we have all the other standards. But at this point, until we really hit some solid number that we know we can achieve on the property, drawing facades is just a guess and wouldn't really, that what the guidelines say for architecture is that we have to have, this is a planner architecture type thing. A retail building has a base, a body, and a top. And so the base is the base, and it's down near the bottom. And then the body of the building, particularly when you're doing retail, if you look at the drawing on the left, you can see there's a lot of transparency, a lot of glass, so that, you know, you're thinking of looking at a store and a retail and how does that work? And there it goes. And then you have a top, and the top needs to be capped, and it needs to, you know, you need to have some changes in the architectural facade so they move and they come out. And so what we're saying is everything that the town center design say about facades we'll meet, but we really would like to get into the final development plan when we have the absolute numbers. We have to spend all the money on how to figure out the septic. We have to spend out all the money to figure out what the architecture is. And we just thought it was premature at this time. We will actually have the tree and topo survey here in the next week or so. So before we get to town council and come back to you, we will have those surveys redone. So whether we technically need that waiver anymore, I don't know. We'll leave that up to Robert and Brad to determine, but we will have that information. But we would like to stay with this facade waiver deferral. We're not trying to get out of it, but you will see it at the next level that gets much, much more detailed than just trying to figure out how we're meeting the town center design guidelines. Next. So that's what I've said. We've requested this waiver. And what the design guidelines say is promote diverse, and we've already been through these before. And we went through the DRB and they agreed with us on this point. You a gentleman on the DRB, Stephen Withers, who was the design head chief for Marriott Vacation for many, many years. I've actually done a few Marriott Vacation projects in my past. And Stephen is a stickler and he is very intent on architecture and he's very intent on Windermere. And so we will get as critical a review from Stephen as we could ever hope to have, which we relish and we're waiting for. Next, please. Our commitment to y'all is that we've shown that we've followed the town center design guidelines from a site plan standpoint exactly and explicitly. And that when you see the next thing for the facades, we will follow it exactly and specifically. That's our stated goal. That's the way we've proceeded through this whole thing. Brad and Robert have pushed us very hard on this. And so we have tried and tried. And I think we have some plans that are before you that meet all those standards. And so next. So at that point, we're ready for all the questions to, this is the end of the presentation with the picture. Yeah, those are just other pictures in case something comes up. So we're ready for your questions and we're ready for your comments and we'd be happy to answer anything you want to ask.
Okay, Mayor, I'm just going to bring up the proposal so it's easier for everybody to take a look at. And again, here's the proposed development plan. First question, that we had from DRB to the DRB members was, and I think Brad answered this, does this current application adhere to the design guidelines? Brad? Okay, you got on mute, buddy.
All right. Yeah, based on our review on the information provided, we believe that's what's been presented does meet the intent and requirements of the guidelines at this level of review. I just need to qualify it by saying we won't be able to, say fully until we get the full plans or the final development plan. But at this point in time, what they're showing, the location of the buildings, location of the parking, and the proposed areas of buffering are compliant with the standards.
Okay. Mayor, at this time, we can go ahead and open up for town council questions. I know several town council members did put some questions in the chat box, but we can do a rundown through each of the council members that are present. Unfortunately, Councilmember Williams is on vacation and will not be able to attend tonight. But if you just want to do a roll call and then go through questions and then move into the public questions, we can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Thank you, Brad, for very thorough presentations this evening. Let's go ahead and start. We'll go seniority wise. Let's go ahead and start with Councilperson Martini.
I'm gonna have to unmute.
Thank you, Mayor, for the seniority nod. And thank you, Brad and Robert, for the presentation, and Mr. Hall for yours as well. Couple of questions. Are there any heritage oaks that will have to be removed from the center of the property, like the parking lot is? And a related question, is the arborist going to be on retainer for the whole entire project and see this through, or are you going to be using him at the beginning and somebody else later on? I think Mr. Hall is muted.
Sorry, I muted, I'm sorry.
Okay.
The arborist has given us all the standards for what he believes tree by tree on what would be the best practices for saving them. And so we followed those, and to the extent that, he will be involved as we move forward into this project. Joe Samnick brings 55 years of experience. I've worked with him multitudes of times, and he is just, he is a very, very knowledgeable and interesting guy. I enjoy spending my time with him.
Yeah, I
You
looked him
learn
up.
so much.
He is top tier, and I just want to make sure that he's going to be on point for the entire project so that I'm sure he understands how we feel about trees, and I know you guys do as well.
Particularly the 3 on Main Street and the one on the mid-block crossing. Those 4 trees are critical to really keeping the character of Main Street, Main Street.
So are there any trees in the parking? I know this is not final design, but I know there are trees in that parking area. And are there any that, well, I guess we can get to that. We maybe have.
There are 3 trees in the parking area. The one is a very nice, I'd like to have it in my yard. It's a nice tree. And then there's 2 large trees in the parking area. But again, it goes back to now the issue gets to be, how do you save these 2 old trees when you know, the grade of the land change when you bring in parking, and you'll be putting down hard surfaces, and we're supposed to be putting in curbs, and we're supposed to be putting in all this stormwater runoff control with pipes and things. And it's just a daunting task to try to save these 2 trees. And then it would be horrific if you tried to do it and then they still died. So for this plan, those 2 trees, we have decided that we will go into the tree mitigation plan for the town, and they will be mitigated in that regard. But as you can see, there's a lot of the heritage trees that go all the way around the edge of the property. And then particularly the 4 on the front that we will be using and protecting.
Yeah, I walked the property. I saw the trees. And I know that there's a possibility of discounting the parking spaces in order to save the trees. So I know we can get back, and there's some discussion to be done on that. On the existing square footage, I didn't see Allen's Ice Cream included in the calculations. Was that one of the other buildings, the Elysium or the Spa Affair? Was there square footage?
I took that information from the Orange County property appraiser.
Yeah. Mr.
So
Martini, I
it
think
may, with the property appraiser, he may not be calling them the exact same names. It could be a sublease to someone else for a part of it.
Yeah, Mr. Martini, I can address that too. The record for that, there's actually 2 pages. So Mr. Hall may have missed the second one. So there is a little bit more there with Tim than what he has on that slide. But I will say, when I did my comparison on the traffic, I did include the ice cream square footage as part of that analysis.
That probably generates the most traffic, I would guess.
Real quick though, too, did it count the residence that's in the back as well as far as square footage?
I did not, but I believe the traffic studies did.
Yeah.
Well, the traffic study is right. They look at them as dwelling units, because traffic analysis for a dwelling unit for residential is based on dwelling units and not size of the dwelling unit.
Yeah, I'm just talking about net gain as far as square footage, because again, with the FAR and everything, the amount of square footage you have on that site now versus what you're going for, you may have 11,000 feet and then you're going for 21,000 feet. So the net difference may be 10,000 feet as opposed to what you're proposing is 14,000 feet.
Well, I did not include the residential as a part of the change in the commercial. I did not.
Okay.
Okay, and last question is regarding, Robert, can you put the site plan back up, please?
Yes, sir.
Jim, I know we talked about this at the DRB meeting, but the water retention area, that big rectangle, is it possible to spread that out in a linear fashion to make it, to make the perceived buffer along Oakdale wider so that the residents will have less to look at, mitigate the impact on those folks, and then redo the parking lot so that
yes, is it possible? Yes, but as mentioned by Brad, and I think he even said he doesn't really after we do our septic analysis, that we'd even get to the 21.7. That when we get to that level of detail, what we're doing with this step is setting maximum standards for building location, and it will specifically follow the town center design guidelines. Once that septic tank comes in, and where can you put it under some of the parking, not under the parking, how do you do all that? That's a super technical, detailed study for a commercial use, particularly in what's a, your Main Street, it's kind of an urban, it's not Orange Avenue in Orlando, but it's kind of an urban thing. You got on-street parking, you got really nice sidewalks with the trees, the base, the sidewalks. It's a very nice thing. So could you change that? Yes, but I think that will all come about after we get past this, what I like to call an entitlement phase. How far can we go with the square footage? But then with the next step, we have to prove that it works. And when we prove that it works, there is a chance to stretch that storm pond and allow it to make the buffer a little thicker, with this slight caveat on, we have to just be careful about the existing heritage trees that are there. We just have to have has to look at that. That rectangle will not really look like a rectangle. The elevations will be changing and moving. The depth of groundwater on this site is at least 20 feet. So it's not just going to be a rectilinear or DOT type looking thing. Plus it won't hold water. It'll be dry. So it'll be mowed, and we're hoping that the buffer and the stormwater all kind of coalesces into one attractive aesthetic landscaped area.
All right, good. I appreciate that. I know this is pretty much preordained by the master plan from 2004, and my goal is to obviously save as many heritage trees as possible, and to mitigate the impact to the residents on Oakdale Street. So I appreciate your flexibility on that, and look forward to seeing the rest of the materials. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Councilperson Martini. That's well said. Councilperson Sapp.
No, I'd like to hear a lot of the questions being answered there in the chat box. My question, I'm not sure can really be answered tonight, and it'll be answered, likely, I guess, when we get to the final design. But I guess maybe if there's somebody that, because there is a pretty good check and balance put in place, not only by the town, but by the health department, maybe there's a better understanding in regards to square footage related to, the septic size that's needed, or the type of, commercial, if that relates, whether it's a restaurant, obviously is going to be different than office space, and how it relates to the type of septic tank that's needed.
Yeah, and that's where we need to get to, because at this point, we, and particularly Jim Carr and his partners, they don't have anything to go to the marketplace. And I think we've put in there that the maximum food and beverage would be just under 3,400 square feet. Well, if it turns out that it's all 3,400 square feet, that's one amount of septic. If it turns out it's 2,200 square feet, well, then that changes everything. Until we kind of get through this step and know where we generally stand, so that then two things start to happen. The true design, the final design initiates, and the final design is driven by all these standards we've talked to today and everything we've committed to, and all the town center design guideline things. And it also then has to react to the market that the owners are finding want to lease space in the center. So it's this little bit of a juggling that goes on, that will go on after, and hopefully when we zoning in place, that when they come back to you, the marketplace will have matched the town center design guidelines. Then the future plans with the final development plan will match the town center design guidelines and the septic and the stormwater and the utilities. So that is yet to come. And it's just, at this point, it's a little premature to absolutely know what we're going to have, because we just don't know at this point until we get through this step with y'all.
Yeah, and I understand that. So maybe it's more of a Brad question, myself and, everybody else on here to get a better understanding, for lack of better terms, the power the health department has, on this project, what's precedent for variances, so on and so forth, or is it a pretty strict guideline?
Go ahead, Robert.
I was going to say, you can talk to Andy McGee, and he'll let you know how hard it is to get something through DOH. They're having they just had a real tough time getting through Department of Health with the proposed brewery. So I'm sure that they're going to have to meet some strict guidelines and standards with them as well, but I'll let Brad elaborate.
Right, that's exactly right, Robert. The Department of Health in the town of Windermere is very critical because of all the septic. So they are a very strong influence on what happens in the town based on the state requirements for septics. And so that's why in my presentation, I do expect it will have a significant impact. I don't have a definition of what that is, but it will, I think, reduce the square footage that's being proposed now when they have to site a drain field. That's really going to be their biggest limiting factor. Septic tanks can go under the parking lot as long as it's done properly. The issue is the location of the drain field and how much of the land would have to be allocated.
Then with this food and beverage, you also get into like grease traps and other things that all have to happen.
Right.
So that food and beverage, which we believe will be really good for the town of Windermere, that you could have a nice place that you could walk to or take your golf cart to and go down there and have a meal, is really important. But it drives the next step of design almost completely, because as the restaurant gets bigger, all the flows get to be more. And so there's this balancing act. And if it turns out that, for example, if it turns out you really can't do a beverage, I think we would hit the 21,000. But if you have to have it, it's the food and beverage that needs all the explanation from the time we get zoned, from that next day on, is going to drive all the decisions of this project.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I just want to make sure I have an understanding, everybody else has an understanding, the check and balances that we do have in place before, shovel hits the ground. Not only do we have a pretty comprehensive master plan that the town did amazing work on back in 2004, but we have the control of the state that is going to put everybody in check too.
Thank you, Councilperson Sapp. Anything further from you, sir? At this time, good. All right. We will we'll go to Councilperson David.
I think pretty much all my questions got answered or asked by Martini and Sapp, so I'm pretty good. I'm just big on the trees. Just want to save as many trees as we can. I know the parking lot, requires some work, but would like to see as many of those heritage trees stay as possible. So.
Understood.
Thank you, Councilperson David. Councilperson Davitt.
Just a couple of real quick questions. So, and it's probably procedural timelines. The initial or the final development plan is submitted at the 100% design?
Yes, the final development plan will be the 100% design. Yes, sir.
So if there's iterations of that, they'll go back to redesign if there's issues with stormwater or septic?
That's correct. Right. Yeah. Yes, sir. It won't come to council until, they get through all their ducks in a row. But as you said, it could come to you all. And if you all make revisions, it could bring them back to design. Yes,
Well,
sir.
that's kind of my concern. I'm hearing a lot of, iterative design processes being discussed throughout the whole thing, with the septic, with the stormwater. There's a lot of variables in here. And what concerns me is that you go through the entire design process, you bring a design to council, there's an issue with it, we've got to backpedal, all the way back to potentially square one in a lot of areas. I would propose as we go through the final development plan that you do a gateway check along the way, 30, 60, 90% design reviews going forward to confirm with town council or the development review board that the design does meet the intent and will be approved in its end state with council.
Yes, sir. And Councilmember Devitt, how we can address that is part of your hearings that will be coming up. There will be a development agreement as part of that ordinance. And if council would so desire, you could include that as part of your condition for approval, that iterative review by town council.
Exactly.
Okay.
Go ahead. That is typically how we've done it in the past, just to make sure we hit all the marks as the project moves forward, Tony.
And it's not in our interest at all from a time and cost perspective to bring you something that then doesn't work and we haven't gotten the other permits. So it's really incumbent upon us to make sure that when you see the final development plan, we have progressed quite, and particularly the stormwater we'll be able to figure out. But the septic, again, I think it is the critical item and we need to work very close with DOH, and we shouldn't be bringing anything to you that we don't believe we can get approved by DOH.
Yeah, I see it as, those two will offset each other. You design a parking lot with an impervious surface, that's going to affect your septic calculations as well, but it may increase your stormwater retention requirements. You do the offset and make a pervious surface on the parking lot to decrease the stormwater, and all of a sudden you're driving up your septic requirement. So, that's my concern, is you're really balancing those two requirements to develop this area. And I want to make sure that, we're meeting the mark on that going forward, and we're not wasting your time, Jim, going forward, and we're making sure we're making good use of the design efforts going forward.
Yeah, and I think I failed to mention in my presentation, between the ownership group and myself and the town, this is a really important project, and this really has to come off and be done very, very well. And if we can all work together and do that, then I think it's a huge win for all the residents. It's a win for us. It's a win for a long time for the people that will be running their shops and stores and restaurants here. This is a really important project, and it needs that scrutiny, which is why we've made all these commitments that we're going to follow the guidelines, but we know that the rubber truly meets the road with the next one, where all this finite design comes together and has to coalesce into a whole.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, this is the first project coming up using the town center design guidelines, as I understand. Those were accepted and adopted in 2004, and here we are in 2021, and you're making a first run at it. So you're absolutely correct, Jim. We need to make sure we adhere to them and do it smartly. That's why I've got the concerns I have.
No, it has to be done right. It has to be done right. Absolutely.
That's all I've got, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilperson Davitt. We appreciate all of your input as well. All right, so I've got a few questions, and Mr. Hall and Mr. Carr, I think you're exactly right. This is a critically important project for the entire town. So we want to make sure that we do this right and that we take our time and we do get it right. So it's something that benefits all the residents and, has a working pro forma that works for you guys as well. So just a few thoughts. I think one of the questions I had for Brad is, Brad, how do we do a traffic study prior to knowing the exact mix of business?
Mayor, that is a very standard procedure in development review, because what you do your best projection of what'll be in there. So, and for example, for this particular project, when you look at the traffic study that was done, it was actually based on a higher square footage than what's actually being proposed to be approved here. So they make their best estimate of what's, they match their development plan between the plans that they're submitting to what they do their traffic study on. But again, if you go back and if you look at the traffic study, you will see there's actually more square footage in the traffic study than what's actually being proposed to you. And again, the other important part about a traffic study, this is a study, this is a model. These are based on average rates by the Institute of Traffic Engineers. So these are educated professional guesses based on professional standards of review. So that's what that's how that is done. But they do provide information that's very important, and it helps to document, as in this case where Kinley Horn reviews it. And actually, when you read the review, and it will be part of your agenda packet, they're actually on the threshold in terms of the requirements of an engineering study of them having to do a right turn lane. But because of the known concerns there with the queuing and the traffic, Kinley Horn said they need to put the right turn lane there, even though they don't necessarily meet the criteria to the T of what it needs to be. So that is a standard way. Again, one of the things that the town, as this moves forward, a condition you could place on the project is monitoring of traffic. And you may recall with Estancia, that was something that the town council did for that project. You had them relook at the traffic once they got to a certain level of development, reanalyze it to see if a turn lane was required. So you can build in, checks within the development as it builds out.
I think what I was looking for there is that I think based on what you're saying, it's safe to say that we went on the conservative side of things to this point, right?
Yes, sir. I would say that traffic study was done on a conservative basis, right? Yes, sir.
Okay. Is the PUD the last opportunity for us to amend the buffer landscape, or can we do that at final development?
Good question. I will never say you can't do anything. So what you're doing under the PUD preliminary plan, you are setting the standards and what they are proposing meets the minimum. You could, when they come back to final development plan, if you're not happy with what they're showing with that, and that is one of the risks that the developer is taking at this point, not showing that level of detail. I believe, yes, you as town council during final development plan review could say, we want a bigger buffer, we want more landscaping, we want X, Y, or Z, because we don't have that level of detail at this point of the review. So yes, I believe you could ask for additional buffering.
But respectfully, we've provided the exact level of detail that's required for a preliminary site plan. So again, this starting to layer on more and more things, I think Brad's statement is correct. That is really a final development plan statement, so that once we get through this PUD and we just have an entitlement, there's no right for us to build anything without going through the next step. So it's at the next step where if you're still really uncomfortable, then I think it all becomes germane.
And that's fine. And I don't, I'm not trying to be difficult in any way. I'm just trying to make sure that everyone has a really clear understanding of what happens when and where the opportunity for input is. And also the fact that, I've done this a few times here, so I know where the questions are going to come from residents. I can predict those, fairly well. I know that not having a facade is going to be a challenge. I'll state that early on. That's my opinion, of course, but I think that, we struggled with that a little bit on the town facilities. We had an early facade on the microbrewery and we didn't have that issue. So, I do think some of those things are, it's just understanding our community. And I want to make sure that we talk about those things early rather than late. And when I talk about landscape, I'm not talking about extending the buffer necessarily. But you know, if you get a landscape plan and it doesn't look like, if it doesn't look sufficient enough, I want to make sure that council has input and residents have input on that. You know, but also we're six reasonable people too. So it's got to be a balance. I certainly understand that.
And Mayor, you absolutely have that opportunity with the final development plan review. You absolutely do to look and to make sure that landscape package that's providing the buffer that's required to protect those properties is sufficient to the council's satisfaction.
And I do believe in the Estancia DA and PUD. There's a requirement that they had to go to the tree board for their entranceway landscaping. Is either that or DRB, I forget which one.
They had to go back to DRB for that.
Yeah, and I think we did it at Rosser as well. And you know, I mean,
Right.
it's all reasonable stuff. We just want to make sure that, you know, one of the things is, you know, we want to make sure we have eyes on everything. So that's a big point for me. So, you know, I don't want to beat up the septic thing here, but, you know, and I'll say it again. I do think that is there no way to know? Is there no way to get septic guidance first? Is that just completely prohibitive in terms of, so we can know what the mix and square footage is going to be?
Well, because it's actually, you know, I've been doing this a long time, and in the 33 years, this is one of the few projects I've ever done on septic.
Yeah,
Okay, so
understood.
when I call up all the really top-notch engineers that I know here in Central Florida, you say, I need you to help me figure out septic. They all throw their hands up because they never do septic. You just have a pipe and it goes and it sends up somewhere else. So when you do this, you actually have to deal with the people that are going to be the installers and are the contractors for septic. So they are really completely unfamiliar with this planning what if scenarios, and it's very hard for them. So we've had those conversations. I think there's probably someone is, you know, one or two are selected as the preferred contractor, but all they want to do is have like these numbers and crunch them and see what happens. So that's been our problem. We don't have really like the consultant that you can go to. We have to go to the contractor, and it's been laborious. So that's why, and it's not required with the preliminary site plan to have this be completely figured out now. So we're just waiting for the next step to have that answer for you.
Okay, thank you, sir. The if this project moves along, we get everything approved, we're moving nicely, everybody's happy. Mr. Carr and Mr. Hall, are you going to bring us to fruition on this, or is this something that you guys will get approved and then someone else might develop, or
no? I've talked to Jim and the ownership group. This is a legacy project for them, that they will own it. They will be leasing it. They'll own the buildings. This is not a flip to somebody else to come back in and change everything up with y'all. This is a long-term investment so that they're not going to make their money in one big bite by selling it. They're going to make their money over the length of time by providing these services to the town.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your candor there. Again, these are just questions that I use to you know, I'm predicting what people are going to be asking the council and asking us and asking myself. And I like to have all the best answers that I can. The one interesting thing that I did not really put all together until we look at this site plan that we look at tonight in front of us here, actually on the screen. And this is just a comment. It's interesting though, as we use the overlay, that in order to build this portion, and because of the way the property was purchased, you know, and these guys have every right to do this, in my opinion. Property rights are property rights. But one of the things that it looks to me that will occur a bit of an unintended consequence potentially is that in essence, you lock the other development on this block because they really can't redevelop at any point, I would assume, because they're not going to have the opportunity for parking, drainage, or additional septic. Not really looking for an answer there. It's just something that council should be aware of. And that's all I have at this point.
Mayor, as to your comment relative to who ultimately develops this property, I'm not sure we can legally require that through a PUD or a DA. They, again, through their property rights can transfer it, but we're just gonna have to hold Mr. Carr, Mr. Hall to their words.
Understood. And you know, and that's not my intent. My intent is to ask the questions and get the answers. And you know, I think that it takes trust on both sides to make these kind of projects work.
Absolutely. And Mayor, if I could, before we get to the questions that are in the chat box, most of them are proposed. Most of the questions I wrote down were from questions that I've heard from previous meetings that we've held, and also personal meetings that I've had with a lot of the residents. Now, Brad, when you talk about the 25 net peak trips, is that 25 per hour or 25 per the 3 hours of peak?
That's 25 over the peak period. So not per hour. That's over that 4 to 6 period is the 25. But again, you know, it's a planning level analysis. So that doesn't mean every hour there's additional 25 cars. That means over that period of time, it's estimated to be 25 vehicles.
Okay, so it's going to be like estimated 5 vehicles per hour.
Yeah, if you just, right, if you do that. But again, that is an estimate.
Yeah, because I know one of the comments that we had on one of the other, I think the DRB was, you know, they hear 45 and they think, okay, or the total of 415 trips or whatever it was, that kind of scared everybody. And then when you break it down to about 6 an hour, I think that relieved a lot of people's concerns when it came to the traffic standpoint. And then, correct. And then also with the residential buildings and the ice cream shop not being a part of the square footage analysis to what is existing and what is proposed, I think when we actually had the DRB meeting, we were able to figure that out, and the net difference was more minimal than it actually seems to be as far as a large development versus a smaller development. The first question I have here is, again, that was one of the questions was, what is the net gain of the existing square footage versus what is proposed? And again, we've already gone through that right now. It looks like it's 14,000 square feet, but that could be minimal or minimized by adding on that residential property and Allen's Creamery. I think we've discussed in length of how the septic system is going to restrict the development. Again, the developer is looking for about 21,000 square feet. And they're gonna have to figure out through DOH, you know, how many square feet they actually get approved on. Will they bring water in for this project? As stated, that water is already available, so it's already there. And as you know, we have a water master utility plan that we are implementing at this point. So if you are in the vicinity of this project, there may be a possibility to get water to your property or subbed out to your property. And they will be required to meet adequate fire flows. Coe Fire Department will be doing the review on that. And a 2-story building, I can guarantee you, has to meet a different threshold than a 1-story building. So they had to take that in consideration for the construction. The next one I had is, and again, this one's coming from Susan Carter, and she maybe elaborate on this. Can the land development code be changed or updated? I mean, a land development code can be changed and updated at any point. It takes 2 readings in order to do that. But I'm not sure what specifically you're looking for as far as a land development code change, or is that just a general question as far as can it be changed?
That's a general question.
Yeah, it can be changed. We've changed it several times in order to meet not only new stormwater regulations. We just got the FEMA flood maps where we have to take a look at our ordinances and our land development code. So yes, it can be changed just through an ordinance reading or 2 ordinance readings. Next questions, what are the options for offsite or for parking? This is one of the things that came up during DRB, and again, questions that people have come up. You know, a lot of people were out there saying, well, there's going to be 84 parking spots in the land development code and through the PUD process, because the PUD opens the door for negotiations between the town council, and the developer. Is if there's a possibility to where we're able to save a tree, and you know, in lieu of those 4 parking spots, we can work that out with the developer to where they would pay for 4 parking spots to be located somewhere else. They can into a parking mitigation plan or a tree mitigation plan. So if there's any possibility that we're able to save any of those trees, and those trees will be identified through the survey that they're getting right now, we'll work with them and try to figure out if we can reasonably save those trees. And again, just like with the brewery, we're able to negotiate with them off-site parking to try to do some offsets. So we're making sure we protect that tree canopy. And I'll keep going down here. Is the final development review at 100% design? That was from Councilmember Devitt. And I believe that we already reviewed that. Timeline for development review, I think that was addressed through the presentation from Brad. This one is from Susan Carter. There seems to be substantial live oak trees on the southwest corner of Oakdale and 6th, one with a DBH of 87.5 and another with a DBH of 73. They're not shown on the master plan. How can those and their critical root zones be protected? Also within the property with the yellow house, there's another substantial oak, but that appears to be larger than 87.5 DBH tree. That also should be included in these protections. How do we prioritize this so these heritage oaks are not damaged or removed? And, you know, I can answer for both probably the applicant and the town, as we'll try to negotiate that as much as possible. If there's a way to save those trees, we'll try to save those trees. And that'll get into, I think, more of the final design. But in the PUD and the DA, we can put language in there that, you know, we'll reasonably try to protect every tree on the property. And if not, we'll work out, again, parking versus tree mitigation plans.
We're gonna have to be very careful with the required wall and the foundation that you need for a wall with the intrusion into the root zone. That is going to be the yin and yang of doing these things. The wall is really necessary for the buffering, but we just have to be very careful with how we do that.
Yeah, that's again something that we can discuss through the PUD process, whether a wall or a berm, similar to the one that is located on 7th Avenue. Isn't that right, Brad?
That would be a deviation or waiver from the standards of the downtown design guidelines. So yes, I mean, a council could make that. We would just have to identify that as a waiver to the standard of the master plan that requires the wall.
Okay. Okay. What is the net impact of peak traffic? We've already answered that. Is the parking paved? What do the parking lights look like? And how do we handle light pollution from Oakdale residents directly across from the proposed building and parking lot?
Yeah, so yeah, at this point, the parking will pave. In terms of the parking lights, what the town code requires is those lights need to be shielded and directed away from the residential. So they will be protected from light pollution going across Oakdale. And in terms of the parking lot with headlights and things, that's one of the purposes of the wall as well, is to block that kind of light intrusion. But yes, the lights would have to be oriented in place where they're shielded and not directed towards the residential area.
Approximately how many feet are there between the travel lane and the property line of the proposed project? Are there any survey markers on site now?
So I saw that question, so I was quickly measuring. It varies. It varies because, as we all know, the dirt road out, they vary. So it varies anywhere between 50 to 30 feet between the property line and the travel way of the dirt road. It just as you move north across the property, that distance gets greater between the property line and the travelway. But they are not allowed to use that right of way as part of their buffering. That remains as is. That does not get changed.
So, but effectively, the buffer isn't because of Oakdale, and it's a wide right of way with a narrow dirt street. Effectively, it's not 20 feet, it's like 35 feet plus that will be grass and maintained with, like 8 heritage oaks in that area. So for the residents, it will be a much grander area. In looking at it and ignoring the right-of-way line, it'll be much wider than just the 20 feet on property.
Okay. The other question again, are they compliant as proposed? And again, I think that was something that was asked at the DRB meeting, and the answer again was yes, but for those 2 conditions. Brad?
That's correct. And those 2 waivers were not to the standards, but towards the submittal requirements.
Brad, are you Brad X?
Brad became Brad X.
Yes, my building, I'm in my office and I have a green office, and at 7:30, my power gets shut down. So I am now on my phone.
Okay, I was like, who's this Brad X coming in at the last minute? I was getting scared. I was like, uh-oh.
I'm sitting in the office, although I have a very nice view of Amalie Arena in the port, but yeah, so I'm sitting in the park on my phone right now. So yes, they're in terms of the standards, what we have, they are compliant. Just the waivers are related to the submission requirements.
Okay. The next one's a statement. It's from Mr. Stephen Weathers, who can go into probably in depth on how the 2004 guidelines came into fruition. But the other permitting agency is the Cody Fire Department, which we've talked about. Mr. Hall, what other projects have you worked on in Windermere and West Orange area?
Wow. In Windermere, it's been a long time, but I participated in the Four Corners when that was done way back when, between the town and Orange County. And in Horizon West, I don't know, I've done thousands of acres and homes in Horizon West in this part of Orange County, as well as a fair amount of work in Winter Garden.
Okay. Thank you. Again, the other question was, does that include the residential building square feet? We've answered that. Same thing with Allen's Ice Cream. Would hope to include those in the next round. This one's from Brandy. What is the percentage of pavers are calculated? And if they are typically impervious pavers, can we require the applicant to do a highly permeable surface instead of pavers around the trees?
That is our intent.
Yeah, we can, I think in the PUD or the DA require arborist recommendations within the DA for the protections of those trees.
Correct.
And these came from Joe Samnick.
Okay. Will traffic impact fees be assessed like they were for Estancia and Rosser Reserve? I guess the question is, can they be? And again, what we used, I think, for Estancia and Rosser was Orange County's traffic impact fees.
Right. Robert, I do want to be a little careful. The Town of Windermere does not have an adopted transportation impact fee. So what that is, it's what the payment is. It's a negotiated mitigation payment to the town for transportation. I just need to be careful because there is legislation at the state level related to impact fees. So, you know, what would be assessing is not an impact fee, but it would be a negotiated fee payment to the town for impacts.
Okay. This one, I think, was answered already by Mayor O'Brien. Why not determine the septic requirements prior to residents are able to view the facade sooner than later? Again, the facade was a major sticking point for the town facilities. I believe that was already answered. Then we have respectfully, I would like to know which of the trees are not going to be saved. I think once we get the tree survey, we're going to be able to know the species and the DBH. And we should have that, as Mr. Hall said, in the next week and prior to the next town council meeting. Can there be, this one came this morning with a Zoom call I had with a resident. Can there be better pedestrian crossings in this area, such as the WAGs, meaning the WAG lights that we have? Currently, 6th Avenue is a very busy roadway during the peak times and even on the off-peak times. I know LRP is looking at various locations of where to put those WAGs. So I guess that would be something that we would have to discuss with the developer as maybe some sort of a, negotiated traffic deal, or figure out where the best place would be to put those WAGs. But, I do realize that there is a hard time crossing 6th Avenue, especially during those peak times.
Okay.
I don't know if this is supposed to be, okay. How many people go to Wendy's or Starbucks per hour? How does that agree with the traffic study? I don't believe we're allowed to have a Starbucks or a Wendy's.
Nor a drive-through.
Yeah, well, and I do just real quick about that, where that prohibition is, it is not in the town's code. And actually, Ms. Burkhalter found this for me. Where that prohibition came about when that project from many years ago was moving forward, one of the development agreement proposed conditions was that to prohibit the drive-throughs as well as prohibit the chain stores. But that is, just so everybody is aware, it is not in the code, but the town council would have that ability to put that same condition on this property as well.
And as you can see from the plan, no drive-throughs proposed.
Right.
I know. I was just pointing it out because it'll come up as a question. So it's always good to talk about these things now.
Yeah, this is just a statement from Susan Carter. I agree about the wall foundation. Also would like to point out that the berm on top of the critical root zones can affect the health of the tree. Again, this is from Brittany, who actually is the one I spoke to this morning. Is there a way to have a better crosswalk for residents to access the downtown from the Bessie side of Windermere? And again, we can work with the developer, Kimley Horn Associates, and LRP to figure out where that crossing would best be located. Concern is 5th Avenue was designed for parallel parking, but was changed to front end parking. 5th Avenue may need to be widened to accept the proposed traffic and trucks. Again, that's a statement from Stephen Withers, and that can be something we can work out through the actual development plan. Correct, Brad?
Right. The traffic study and the review did not show that need, but that's something that could still be looked at. Yes, sir.
Okay. Can no right turn and left turn signs between peak hours be put up for Oakdale like they are on Main Street? I'm guessing this is for like the no cut through, or this is from Daniel Floyd. Is this a general cut through traffic comment, or is it a, yes, for no, okay, yeah. It is for the no cut through, and we are looking at that, and we're still reevaluating it. Again, with the COVID times, it kind of put us at a disadvantage to figure out if what we have is working and what's not working. The only time that we figured out it wasn't working was when we had the issue with Duke last week. But we're still monitoring that, and we'll adjust it as we see fit. But we're still working on that cut through issue. That's all I have for the questions in the chat box. If you have any questions, please raise your hand using the raise hand icon, and then we'll call on you. All right, so I see none. Mayor, if you want to make any final comments, or if the applicant or Brad wants to make any final statements, you're free to do so.
Robert, I'd just like to say to close out again is please at any time, please contact me if anyone has any other would like to discuss, the information that I have provided. I'm happy to speak with anyone. So please don't.
Should we contact you as Brad Cornelius or Brad X?
Yeah,
Jim, I think you found your first tenant. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works.
That needs a real office.
Yeah.
This Jim Carr, I'd just like to make a couple of points. And, first of all, I know this question was raised before. Are we, getting this entitled and going to flip it to some developer and sell it and make a bunch of money? Absolutely not. We've owned it for, I think, 15, 16 years now. There's no more land in Windermere. We live here. We don't plan on leaving. This is going to be an investment for my family, my partner, who's Jim Gissy, and it's income producing property. We love it. It's a trophy, may not be the right way to call it, but that's how we feel about it. There's no more. So we're not selling it. That's not our interest. A couple of things on saving trees and the design of the parking and all of that. Where the the ingress egress point on 6th Avenue is required to come in, and that's by the plan adopted by the town. Those two large oaks that everybody keeps talking about line up directly where that comes in. I want to save them. I'd love to save them. And hopefully we can. We'll do everything we can, but the expense to save them may be too great. But that's something we're definitely looking at and want to talk about. So, we'll do everything in our power to do that if we can make that happen. And appreciate all the comments, the citizens, the neighbors. I understand all the concerns, and we're here to be, a good neighbor. We're not looking to be a bad neighbor. I want downtown Windermere to be a little bit better than it is now. In the past, I think we had a little more synergy when we had a post office and a ready market, and you could go downtown. There's still good things there, but I think this could really make it something that people go to. And also, I know we're talking about pass-through traffic, but I'm expecting the locals to come here. They can walk, they can drive golf carts. We like to see some golf cart parking in this parking lot area. And this needs to be the center of Windermere where you can enjoy your hometown. So we hope to deliver that and look forward to working with you guys to get there.
I see. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. I appreciate you being here and your candor, brother. We definitely appreciate that, Jim, as well. I see Stephen Withers' hand up.
I would just like, since Mr. Hall made comments about me in his presentation, to say that I've worked with Jim for about 30 years. There's no better person in Orlando that I've met that does what he does. End of my
Thank
time.
you. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. That means a lot coming from you, sir. Hey, I just want to comment. Number one, I appreciate everybody being here tonight. Brad, great presentation. Robert, thank you for putting it together. Dorothy, staff, and council. I think what I see here tonight is that we've learned a lot from our past, past challenges that we've had with development. We've been very fortunate, but we've had to go through a lot of work to get where we have with the development here, because we care a lot about what things look like here and how the feel works, and that they're appropriate for our town. So again, I appreciate everybody's input, thoughts, and time. I think it was a really productive workshop, and if there's nothing else for the good of the order, we will go ahead and adjourn at 7:57 p.m. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Good night.